In World War II, bullets were deadly, but infection was the real executioner. For centuries, soldiers didn't die screaming on the battlefield. They died days later, quietly, from wounds that rotted from the inside. Even expert surgeons could only watch as young men slipped away from infections they knew how to treat, but had no way to stop. Then, in the middle of the war, something arrived that left German medical staff stunned. A simple substance, invisible to the eye. And yet, it did what no weapon, no surgery, and no battlefield miracle ever had. This is the true story of the American invention that didn't just save soldiers, it ended battlefield infections and changed war forever. Before penicillin, war didn't end when the shooting stopped. In fact, for many soldiers, the real danger began after they were wounded. A bullet through the leg might be survivable. A piece of shrapnel in the arm could be removed, but days later, fever would set in. The wound would swell, darken, and begin to smell. German doctors knew this nightmare well. They were highly trained, disciplined, and experienced. Their field hospitals were efficient, their surgeons skilled. But once infection took hold, their options collapsed, amputations were rushed. Limbs were sacrificed to save lives, and often failed anyway. Historically, more soldiers died from infected wounds than from the weapons that caused them. Gangrene, sepsis, blood poisoning. These weren't rare complications, they were expected outcomes. Doctors braced themselves for the moment when a patient's condition suddenly turned, knowing exactly how the story would end. By the later years of the war, Germany faced growing shortages. Clean supplies were scarce, hospitals were overcrowded, antibiotics, as we understand them today, simply didn't exist in usable quantities. Even minor wounds could become death sentences. Then Allied prisoners started arriving. Some were badly injured, yet they weren't dying the way they should have. Wounds healed faster, fevers broke, infections disappeared. German medical staff noticed, and they were confused. As the war dragged on, German doctors began noticing something deeply unsettling. Allied soldiers, even those with horrific wounds, were surviving injuries that should have been fatal. Gunshot wounds that normally turned septic were healing cleanly. Shrapnel injuries that once meant inevitable infection were closing without complication. At first, German medical staff suspected superior hygiene or better surgical timing, but the difference was too dramatic. Some prisoners arrived with wounds several days old, exactly the kind that usually spelled death. Yet instead of worsening, their conditions improved almost immediately after treatment. Fever dropped, swelling receded. The smell of decay never came. When questioned, some Allied medics spoke quietly of a new drug. They described it almost casually, as if it were just another supply item, penicillin, a substance grown from mold, refined, and injected directly into wounded men. To German doctors, this sounded impossible. For generations, infection had been the great limiter of medicine. Surgeons could cut, stitch, and amputate, but bacteria always had the final word. Now that rule was being broken. In German hospitals, doctors watched helplessly as their own patients died from infections that Allied soldiers were walking away from. The contrast was brutal. To men with similar wounds, one survived. One didn't. The difference wasn't skill, it was chemistry. Some German physicians later admitted they felt awe mixed with despair. This wasn't just a medical advancement. It was a glimpse into a future Germany could not access, at least not in time. The battlefield hadn't changed, but survival suddenly had. By 1944, penicillin had quietly become one of the Allies' most powerful advantages, and Germany knew it. Intelligence reports mentioned it, captured medical kits confirmed it. But producing it at scale was another matter entirely. The Allies had turned penicillin into an industrial miracle. American factories mass-produced it by the ton, shipping it across oceans, straight into field hospitals and frontline aid stations. Wounded soldiers received injections within minutes of injury. Infection never had time to take hold. What once killed men slowly over days was now stopped in hours. Germany, however, was trapped by shortages. Bombed factories, limited raw materials. No industrial pipeline capable of matching Allied output. German scientists understood penicillin as potential. Some had even studied similar molds before the war, but the regime had prioritized weapons over medicine. Tanks were built, planes were launched, antibiotics were neglected. In the field, this decision became deadly. German medics were forced to rely on outdated treatments, sulfa drugs, alcohol washes, amputations performed too late. They worked tirelessly, but medicine had limits, and they were hitting them every day. Captured German doctors later admitted the truth. Penicillin didn't just save Allied lives, it preserved fighting strength. Soldiers returned to duty faster, units stayed intact. Morale rose because men knew they could survive being wounded. War isn't only decided by firepower. It's decided by who can afford to save their wounded and who can't. And by the time Germany realized this, it was already too late. When Allied troops pushed deeper into Europe, the difference became impossible to ignore. Battlefield hospitals on the Western Front no longer smelled of rot and decay, they smelled of disinfectant and hope. Soldiers who would have been written off as dead in earlier wars were sitting up, talking, even joking within days. Penicillin had rewritten the rules of survival. German prisoners were among the first to witness it up close. Wounded Wehrmacht soldiers treated by Allied medics survived injuries that stunned their own doctors. In some cases, German medical staff openly asked questions, trying to understand how infections were being stopped so quickly. The answer was always the same: early treatment, clean wounds, and a drug that killed bacteria instead of the patient. By war's end, the numbers told a brutal story. In previous conflicts, infection killed more soldiers than bullets. In World War II, that equation flipped, largely because of penicillin. The Allies didn't just outgun Germany, they outhealed it. Every saved life meant experience preserved, morale strengthened, and pressure maintained on the front lines. After the war, German doctors openly admitted what they had seen. Penicillin wasn't just a medical breakthrough, it was a strategic one. It shortened hospital stays, reduced amputations, and permanently changed how wars would be fought. No modern army would ever go to war without antibiotics again. What began as a forgotten mold became one of the most decisive inventions of the 20th century, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield isn't designed to kill, but to save. If stories like this, the hidden forces that truly shaped World War II, matter to you, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to World War Ashes for deep, human stories that history books often overlook, and comment below if you think medicine deserves more credit for winning wars than guns ever did.